Yo guys, what's up? Jerome here, and today I want to talk about something really fun, which is the upcoming 30% ICC raid buff we're getting. This is a buff that's going to change everything. It's completely unprecedented. We've never really seen anything like it in Classic. I want to talk about the timeline for this buff, when we're going to see it, and exactly, how it's going to scale up. And then I also want to talk about things that nobody's considering yet, like the raid comp changes. How many healers do you get to drop when you have this buff? How do your tanks change? How do your DPS change? I want to cover everything, so let's get right into it. Before we talk about the timeline and the raid comp changes, we should probably cover what the actual buff is. So imagine stepping into ICC with a pretty awesome magical boost that makes you tougher, you're stronger, and all the heals you receive are way better as well. For example, you have a Prot Paladin tank with 50,000 health, and that'll jump all the way up to 65,000 health, which makes it really easy to survive Lich King hits. Then your Holy Paladin will be going from 13,000 Holy Lights all the way up to 17,000. And your extremely handsome Fury Warriors will be jumping from 14,000 to 18,000 DPS. There is a catch though. Instead of Blizzard just dropping this awesome buff and leaving ICC alone for the next 5 months, it'll scale up every couple weeks until it reaches 30% damage, healing, and health. So you might ask what the actual impact on gameplay will be. Although most people call the upcoming ICC changes a buff, it's really just a nerf done in different ways than past nerfs. The new and exciting approach of actually buffing player power has some positives as well as several controversial negatives. See, it's always been suspected that the actual raid balance of ICC was designed around the 30% buff. Fights like heroic Lich King with extremely punishing one-shot mechanics feel a lot more manageable with 30% more health and damage. Currently, a pitiful number of guilds have cleared the heroic Lich King, only 175. That means barely anybody's obtained the invincible mount or the sweet 284 weapons. With the 30% buff coming, that means heroic clears of fights like Putricide and Lich King will finally be doable for thousands of guilds. Honestly, I'm a little bit wary of the buff myself because I know it'll demotivate my guild that's just about to kill the Lich King. But I know you guys in the comment section seem pretty excited for the buff so far. What do the rest of you guys think though? Do you think you'll end up more motivated or less motivated to raid ICC after the buff drops? Another controversial change is that ICC becomes extremely easy for normal mode groups. When we finally get the 30% buff, fresh 5,000 gear score characters should be able to easily handle ICC. Right now, I dare you to try to get a 5,000 gear score character into ICC. I'm pretty sure you'd be thrown into a volcano. Personally, I'm all for this change. It'll be really nice to take my warrior into normal ICC groups to get that sweet gear. It'll also motivate me to gear up way more ults for Cataclysm. Then we have the whole weird part where people are going to do 20,000 damage in ICC and then they're going to go to Ruby Sanctum and do way less damage. Ultimately, taking away damage from people feels really bad. Blizzard at least definitely agrees with that take. Future raids like Firelands had completely different nerf systems. Not to get too negative here, but a lot of guilds do lose some motivation when they're right before a week that a patch is going to hit. If you're slogging through Putricide heroic progression and you know you can get a 5% damage and health buff the next week, it really takes the hype away. Another pretty interesting and really weird aspect of the upcoming ICC buff is that parsing and speedrunning get really strange. The older speedrun records will be completely demolished and your 99 parse on Sindragosa might just be obsolete. So now let's talk about the timeline and the expectations for the buff. I did unearth some words straight from Blizzard's Tim Jones, and they do come with a side of take it with a grain of salt. Tim Jones mentioned in a recent podcast that the first ICC buff is probably not longer than 8 weeks or 2 months after release. That's a Blizzard probably, which is about as solid as a promise from a goblin, which is, not that solid. So while we could mark our calendars for December 5th based on the 8-week timeline from the October 12th drop, we really shouldn't engrave that in stone just yet. This raid's been a tough nut to crack, a lot tougher than most of us thought. This might mean we even see the 5% raid buff waving at us a little bit sooner, maybe even mid-November if the raid bosses keep laughing in our faces. There is a kicker though. In a more recent interview, Crix got our man Agren to walk back some of these dates like they were hot coals from a Deathwing flyby. No confirmations, no promises, just good old-fashioned Azerothian ambiguity. So you're probably wondering, what does that mean for us, the heroes bracing against the cold winds of Northrend? It means we stay alert, we keep our suspiciously pointy ears to the ground, and we adapt. If Blizzard decides to throw us a lifeline a little bit earlier, we grab it. If not, we keep grinding. What about those buffs that are rolling out every couple weeks though? If the pattern holds, we could see a pretty steady climb. 10% by mid-December, 15% by the new year, and so on. But remember, that's if the pattern holds. We're dealing with the same folks that thought soon TM was an acceptable time frame. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. Keep your strategies extra flexible, your potions stocked, and your guildmates, romantically close. And the moment I catch wind of any changes, you will be the first to know. I've got your back. Until then, let's hear your battle plans. Are you gearing up for a way earlier buff, or are you gearing up for the long haul? Sound off in the comments and let's brave this blizzard together. Speaking of braving the blizzard though, a lot more guilds are going to be clearing the Lich King with this new buff. We do have some pretty great data from the past though to explain exactly what's going to happen. Back in the old days when the 5% buff dropped, the number of putricide kills jumped up nearly 1,000. This pretty much happened with all the fights, like the Lich King, Blood Queen, even Syndragosa. Then progression basically leveled off again, as you might expect, until the next buff. It's not just the number of kills that will be affected though. The strategies for pretty much every fight will completely shift once the buff is implemented. On Morrogar, for example, you could practically just plant and pump DPS even during Bone Storm. Then there's something like Blood Queen, where it becomes a lot less tight with the DPS check. Sourfang is also pretty much just completely free with a 30% more health for the mark targets, and you can just blast the Blood Beast as well. I'll get into specific strategy changes in future videos, but just expect you can worry way less about mechanics and more about pumping maximum damage. That does mean there will be some heavy raid comp shifts as well. The best scaling classes will only scale better with the buffs. Ferals, fire mages, hunters, warriors, the usual. We'll have to wait and see on Death Knights, but it is entirely possible gargoyles won't even get the buff, which would put them at a huge disadvantage. It's not just the DPS that'll be changing either, it'll also be the tanks. Old-time favorites like Prot Warriors might just be back in business with way more health. On the healer side of things, though, it really is all bad news all around. I mean, most guilds will want to drop to 4 healing, but even some might drop to 3 for some fights. That means 2 Holy Paladins and a Disc Priest, and then maybe a dual-spec Shaman or a Druid or a Priest. That being said, though, a lot of guilds are still going to run 5 healers for fights like the Lich King, since it just makes the infest way more manageable. While the raid comps shift, the raid types themselves will shift as well. We'll be seeing far more GDKP runs with the buff, since that attractive Lich King gear will finally be obtainable. I can only imagine how high Invincible will go for in GDKPs, probably in the millions of gold. Carry runs will also be a thing now, since you can probably clear the full normal raid with like 20 players instead of 25. I even expect to see some pure naked buyers in heroic GDKPs. That'll definitely be a little bit upsetting for most people to witness. All in all though, there really will be a huge impact on the game because of the ICC nerf. You might just be wondering how to best prepare for this game-changing buff. You should definitely stay tuned for my next video where I'll break down the top strategies to maximize your raid's full potential and get the most out of the buff. I would definitely recommend that you start brainstorming how you'll adapt to the changes. Then of course you could share your initial plans in the comments if you wanted to. If you're as excited as I am to tackle these changes head on, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the huge new ICC Nerf prep guide. Let's conquer the Lich King's fortress together.